I was 36 when I heard those words that changed everything. She'll never know. 3 simple words whispered by my mother to my aunt in our family kitchen during Thanksgiving preparations. They didn't know I could hear them. They had no idea that after 7 years of profound hearing loss, I'd undergone an experimental procedure that had restored my hearing just 3 weeks earlier. I hadn't told anyone in my family yet. I was waiting for the right moment, maybe during dinner when everyone was together, a happy announcement amid the holiday cheer. But those whispered words stopped me cold in the hallway. She'll never know we aren't really her parents. The wooden spoon I was carrying clattered to the floor. My mother's head snapped up, eyes wide with panic as she saw me standing there. The look on my face must have told her everything. In that moment, 36 years of my life crystallized into a perfect, terrible lie, a secret kept even during those 7 years when they thought I couldn't hear anything at all. Growing up in suburban Massachusetts, our family seemed like the American dream personified. Dad, a respected accountant at a firm in Boston, Mom, a kindergarten teacher, beloved by students and parents alike. We lived in a colonial-style house with black shutters and a wraparound porch where Mom placed pumpkins in fall and geraniums in summer. Family photos lined the staircase wall, camping trips to the White Mountains, sailing on Cape Cod, my high school graduation. The perfect New England family. But underneath that polished exterior was something else entirely. Mom was a perfectionist with a razor-sharp tongue. Nothing I did was ever quite good enough. My B+ in calculus was a disappointment because the Peterson girl got an A. My prom dress made me look pudgy around the middle. When I decided to major in communications instead of pre-med, she didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. I remember my 13th birthday party. Mom had invited the entire class, decorated the backyard with Japanese lanterns, and ordered a custom cake. When I accidentally knocked over a punch bowl, staining our deck, she pulled me into the kitchen by my arm. "Why do you always have to ruin everything?" she hissed. "Sometimes I wonder if you're even trying." I returned to my party with puffy eyes and a forced smile while everyone pretended not to notice. Then there was my college graduation dinner at the Harborside restaurant in Boston. Dad had just toasted my accomplishment when Mom interrupted. Of course, if she'd applied herself in high school, she could have gone to Brown instead of UMass. The table fell silent. My boyfriend at the time squeezed my hand under the table. Despite everything, I tried desperately to earn their approval. When I landed a job at a prestigious PR firm in New York City, I thought things might change. I sent them plane tickets for my 30th birthday, a grand gesture. I wanted to show them I'd made it, that I was worthy. I'd booked a private dining room at an exclusive restaurant and planned to introduce them to my new circle of successful friends. They never showed up. A text message. "Your father has a migraine. Maybe next time." I sat in that empty private dining room, surrounded by empty chairs, making excuses to the waitstaff. It was shortly after that I began to lose my hearing. It started with high frequencies disappearing, then progressed rapidly. The doctors called it idiopathic sudden sensory neural hearing loss, a fancy way of saying they didn't know why it was happening. Within 18 months, I was nearly deaf. I learned sign language, got hearing aids, then a cochlear implant that only partially worked. I moved back to Massachusetts, back home, because New York became too difficult to navigate. Mom and Dad seemed almost relieved by my disability. It was easier to explain away their daughter who couldn't hear than a daughter who simply wasn't good enough. "Poor Caroline," they'd tell neighbors. "She's so brave." I became their badge of parental sacrifice, the daughter they nobly cared for. What they didn't know was that I'd discovered a clinical trial at Boston Medical Center, an experimental neural procedure that might restore my hearing, and I hadn't told them I'd been accepted. Thanksgiving had always been a production in our family. Mom insisted on hosting, transforming our home into a Martha Stewart spread that would make the real Martha jealous. This year was no different. 23 people expected, including extended family from as far as Virginia and Colorado. The house smelled of sage, cinnamon, and pine sol from Mom's obsessive cleaning. 3 weeks after my procedure, I was still adjusting to sound. Everything was overwhelming. The rustle of paper, water running, even the soft whir of the refrigerator. The doctors had warned me to ease back into noisy environments, but I couldn't miss Thanksgiving. It was the perfect opportunity to share my good news. I arrived early to help, as expected. Mom handed me a list of tasks without looking up from her pie crust. The guest towels need to be put out. Not the blue ones, those are for Christmas. Use the burnt orange set in the linen closet. Her voice, hearing it clearly for the first time in years, struck me as higher pitched than I remembered. Dad was in the living room watching football, occasionally shouting at the TV. The sudden volume made me flinch, but he didn't notice. Nobody knew I could hear them. I was still using sign language, still wearing my now unnecessary hearing aids as camouflage. I'd planned to remove them dramatically during dinner to see the surprise on everyone's faces. "Caroline, for heaven's sake, you're folding those napkins all wrong," Mom snapped, grabbing one from my hands. "Like this, remember? Diagonal first, then the points up." I nodded apologetically, though I'd done it exactly as she'd taught me years ago. Aunt Linda arrived next, bringing her famous cranberry relish and the latest family gossip. She hugged me too tightly, speaking exaggeratedly as people often did when they thought I couldn't hear. "How are you doing, sweetheart? Any better?" I smiled and signed that I was fine, the same as always. As guests filtered in, I watched their interactions with new awareness. Uncle Robert commented on how brave I was, the same word they always used. Cousin Beth asked Mom if I was still refusing to try that new specialist in New York, a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. Mom sighed dramatically and said, "She's always been stubborn, gets it from her father's side." I retreated to the kitchen to help with final preparations. Mom and Aunt Linda were discussing my cousin's new baby when Mom's phone rang. She checked the caller ID, and her face paled. "I need to take this," she said, stepping into the pantry and closing the door. 5 minutes later, she emerged looking shaken. "Everything okay?" Aunt Linda asked. "It was nothing. Wrong number," Mom replied, but her hands trembled as she reached for her wineglass. The dining room was a Norman Rockwell painting come to life. The long table with its autumn centerpiece, candles flickering, crystal glasses catching the light. I sat between my second cousin's new husband and my mother's college roommate's daughter, the singles section of the table. Mom always seated me with eligible men, still hoping at 36 I'd find someone willing to look past my disability. Dinner proceeded with the usual formalities. Dad carved the turkey, Grandpa Bob said the blessing, wine flowed freely. I watched Mom check her phone repeatedly under the table, her face growing increasingly tense. When dessert was served, Uncle Robert decided to make a toast. "To family," he said, raising his glass, "and to Caroline, who inspires us all with her courage." Everyone turned to me with those familiar, sympathetic smiles. I'd seen them for 7 years. The head tilts, the soft eyes, the silent commendation for existing despite my broken ears. In that moment, as the pumpkin pie was passed around, I nearly stood up to tell them, to remove my hearing aids and announce my miracle. But then Mom excused herself abruptly, motioning for Aunt Linda to follow. They went to the kitchen, and I, needing a moment away from the pitying glances, followed a minute later. I paused in the hallway when I heard my name. "About Caroline," Mom was saying, her voice hushed but crystal clear to my newly functional ears. "Is it about the adoption records?" Aunt Linda asked. "Did they contact you again?" "Yes," Mom whispered. "They found her birth mother. She wants to meet Caroline." After all these years, what are you going to do? My mother's next words froze me in place. Nothing. She'll never know we aren't really her parents. It would destroy her, especially now with her hearing. She needs us. The wooden serving spoon I was carrying slipped from my fingers and clattered to the floor. Time seemed to stop in that hallway. The spoon rolled across the hardwood floor, its sound echoing like a gong in my ears. Mom and Aunt Linda turned toward me, their faces draining of color simultaneously. "Caroline," Mom gasped, "how long have you been standing there?" I touched my hearing aids, then slowly removed them. The gesture was deliberate, theatrical even. "Long enough," I said, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. Too loud, perhaps, or too clear. "I can hear you." Mom's hand flew to her throat. "What? Since when?" "3 weeks ago." Experimental procedure at Boston Medical. I stepped closer, my body vibrating with a strange, cold anger. I was going to surprise everyone tonight. Funny how you beat me to it with a surprise of your own. Aunt Linda backed away, mumbling something about giving us privacy, but I shook my head. "No, stay. Apparently, you've been in on this my entire life." I turned back to Mom. 36 years. You've had 36 years to tell me I'm adopted, and you never did. "Caroline, please," Mom pleaded, reaching for my arm. "Let's discuss this privately. The family." "The family should know the truth for once," I said, my voice rising. I turned and walked back into the dining room, where conversation instantly hushed as everyone noticed my hearing aids were gone. "Caroline has something to share," Mom said desperately behind me, trying to regain control of the situation. "She's had a medical procedure." "I can hear again," I announced, cutting her off. 3 weeks ago, I had an experimental neural procedure that restored my hearing. There were gasps, a few scattered claps, exclamations of surprise. Dad stood up, genuine shock on his face. "But that's not all I learned today," I continued, my voice steadier than I felt. "I just overheard Mom telling Aunt Linda that I'm adopted, that my birth mother has found me and wants to meet me, and that they never planned to tell me." The silence that followed was absolute. Forks froze halfway to mouths, wine glasses stopped mid-sip. My father's face crumpled, confirming everything before he could deny it. 36 years, I repeated, looking around the table. All those family medical history forms I filled out? Lies. All those times you said I had grandma's eyes or dad's stubborn streak? Lies. "We were going to tell you when you were younger," Dad finally said, his voice breaking. "But then it never seemed like the right time. And the longer we waited—" "The right time?" I laughed, a brittle sound. "Was it when I was struggling with hearing loss? Or when I moved back home because I couldn't manage in New York anymore? Or maybe when I was 13 and you told me I always ruined everything?" Mom flinched visibly at that. "Good. My birth mother wants to meet me," I said, directing this to my father. "Did you know about the calls?" He nodded slowly. "Your mother thought it would be too much for you right now." "My mother," I repeated, the word tasting different on my tongue. "Which one?" Cousin Beth started to cry quietly. Uncle Robert stared intensely at his plate. Grandpa Bob, 92 and usually dozed through family dramas, was fully alert, his eyes darting between me and my parents. "I want the information," I said, "all of it, and I'm going to meet her." "Caroline, please," Mom begged, tears streaming down her face. "We are your parents. We raised you. We loved you." "Loved me?" The question escaped as a whisper. "Is that what you call it? The criticism, the disappointment, the constant reminders that I wasn't good enough?" I reached for my coat draped over an empty chair. "I'm going now. I'll be back tomorrow for my things." "Where will you go?" Dad asked, standing up. I paused at the dining room entrance, suddenly aware of the audience of relatives, their faces a mixture of shock, discomfort, and morbid fascination. "I don't know yet, but I'll hear you if you call." The last thing I saw before I walked out was my mother collapsing into my father's arms, her perfectly arranged Thanksgiving dinner in ruins around her. I spent that night in a Holiday Inn off the highway, staring at the ceiling as trucks rumbled past. Each sound, the ice machine down the hall, the shower dripping, the heating system clicking on, was both miraculous and overwhelming. I could hear again, but everything I thought I knew about myself had been erased in a single moment. By morning, my phone had accumulated 37 missed calls and text messages. Most were from my parents, a few from concerned relatives. One was from Aunt Linda. "There's more you should know. Call me when you're ready." I returned to my parents' house, no, my adoptive parents' house, the next day as promised. Dad answered the door, looking like he hadn't slept. Mom sat rigid in the living room, eyes red-rimmed but makeup perfect as always. "We have everything ready for you," Dad said, gesturing to a manila envelope on the coffee table. "Your original birth certificate, the adoption papers, and the contact information for your birth mother." I picked up the envelope without opening it. "I'd like to pack my things now." "Caroline," Mom began, her voice cracking, "we made a terrible mistake not telling you, but everything else, all the things you said yesterday about not being good enough, that's not true. We've always been proud of you." I looked at her, really looked at her, hearing her words clearly for the first time in years. "No, Mom, you've always wanted to be proud of me. It's not the same thing." Upstairs, as I packed, Aunt Linda called. "Your birth mother's name is Rebecca Winters," she said without preamble. "She was 17 when she had you. Your parents, Ellen and David, they weren't just random people who adopted you, Caroline. Rebecca is Ellen's younger sister." The short I was folding fell from my hands. "Mom's sister? I'm her niece?" "Yes, Rebecca got pregnant senior year of high school. Your grandparents were furious. This was 1986, small-town Massachusetts. They arranged for her to go to a home for unwed mothers in Vermont. When you were born, Ellen and David, who'd been trying for years to have a baby, adopted you legally. The family agreed never to tell you. Rebecca went to college in California afterward and barely kept in touch. So all those years of criticism, of nothing being good enough." I trailed off, a new understanding dawning. Ellen has always been terrified you'd somehow turn out like Rebecca, impulsive, rebellious. I think she pushed you so hard because she was afraid. 2 days later, I met Rebecca at a coffee shop in Cambridge. She had my eyes, my hands, my tendency to tuck hair behind my ear when nervous. She was an art professor now, married with 2 teenage sons, my half-brothers. She showed me photos on her phone, boys with my smile, my chin. "I never wanted to give you up," she said, her hands trembling around her mug. "I was 17 and terrified. My parents, your grandparents, and Ellen convinced me it was best for everyone if you became Ellen's daughter officially. I could finish school, you would have a stable home with 2 parents. It seemed logical at the time." "Why now?" I asked, "after 36 years?" "I've tried before," she admitted. "When you were 18, I contacted Ellen. She said you were heading to college and it would disrupt your life. When you were 25, I tried again. She said you were building your career. Then when I heard about your hearing loss," she paused. "I'm sorry, that must have been incredibly difficult." "It was," I said, "but I can hear now." "Ellen told me about the procedure when I called last month. She said you didn't know about me and never would." Rebecca reached across the table, her fingers stopping just short of mine. I told her I couldn't live with that anymore. Over the following weeks, I learned more about Rebecca, about myself. My biological father had been her high school boyfriend who wanted nothing to do with the pregnancy. My artistic ability, always dismissed by Mom as a nice hobby, came from Rebecca's side. My half-brothers played lacrosse, just as I had in high school. I rented an apartment in Somerville and started rebuilding my life, again. With my hearing restored, I found a position at a small PR firm in Boston. I began seeing a therapist who specialized in adoption trauma and identity issues. I met my half-brothers, who were cautiously excited to have an older sister. My relationship with my parents, Ellen and David, evolved painfully. There were long, difficult conversations, tears, accusations, apologies that sometimes felt too little, too late. Dad made more effort than Mom, calling regularly to check in. Mom sent perfectly wrapped care packages with handwritten notes, but struggled to connect in person. 6 months after Thanksgiving, Rebecca invited all of us, me, Ellen, David, to her home for dinner. Ellen declined immediately. David said he'd think about it. I went alone, nervous but curious to see the life I might have had. Rebecca's house was chaotic in a way Ellen would never allow. Musical instruments in the living room, half-finished art projects on the dining table, a refrigerator covered in family photos and school schedules. Her husband, Michael, grilled steaks in the backyard, while my half-brothers peppered me with questions about New York and PR and what it was like to suddenly hear again after years of silence. As we ate dinner, I found myself studying Rebecca's face, looking for traces of myself. "You know," she said, catching me watching her, "when you were born, I got to hold you for an hour before they took you away. I counted your fingers and toes. I told you I loved you, and that I was sorry, and that I hoped someday you'd understand." That night, as I was leaving, Rebecca handed me a small wrapped package. Inside was a silver locket. "I bought this when I was pregnant with you," she said. "I always hoped I'd give it to you someday." The next morning, I called Ellen, Mom, and asked if she would meet me for coffee. She agreed, arriving precisely on time as always, perfectly put together in a cashmere sweater and pearls. "I met my brothers yesterday," I said after we'd ordered. "They're good kids." She nodded stiffly. "I'm sure they are." "Mom," I said, the word still complicated on my tongue, "I'm not asking you to be best friends with Rebecca, but she's part of who I am, and you and Dad are still my parents, the ones who raised me. That doesn't change because I know the truth now." Her eyes filled with tears. "I was so afraid of losing you," she whispered. "First to your career in New York, then to your hearing loss, now to her." "You never lost me," I said, surprised by the truth of it. "Even when I couldn't hear you, even when you pushed too hard, I was always your daughter." She reached across the table and took my hand, a gesture so uncharacteristic I almost pulled away in surprise. "Can you ever forgive us for not telling you?" I considered her question carefully, hearing not just her words, but the fear behind them. "I'm working on it," I said honestly. "It will take time." And for once, that seemed to be enough for her. It's been 2 years since that Thanksgiving when everything changed. 2 years of learning to navigate a family that's both smaller and larger than I once believed. 2 years of hearing, really hearing, not just sounds, but truths. I won't pretend it's been easy. Some days I'm still angry about the decades of deception. Other days I'm grateful for the chance to know all sides of my story. I have Sunday dinners with Ellen and David twice a month. I spend holidays with Rebecca and my half-brothers. It's messy and complicated and real in a way my life never was before. The locket Rebecca gave me now contains 3 photos. Rebecca holding me as a newborn, Ellen and David at my college graduation, and a recent picture of all of us together. Awkward, but trying. It reminds me that family isn't just about blood or legal documents. It's about choosing to stay, even when it's difficult. about hearing each other, even when the truth hurts. If you're facing your own family secrets or difficult truths, remember that healing isn't linear. Some days you move forward, others you slide back. But every honest conversation is a step toward wholeness. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of family, identity, and finding your voice. Share in the comments if you've experienced something similar. Sometimes knowing we're not alone is the most powerful medicine of all.